All right, so there is danger lurking in 2024 fantasy football drafts at the wide receiver position. And namely speaking, it is scenarios where two wideouts wind up getting drafted in the first 3 rounds of a PPR format. This is the Fantasy Sports Boss with another 2023 lesson learned video. This is the 5th in a series I've been doing since the end of the season. And this one is really interesting, okay? So last season, during the draft last summer in PPR leagues, there were 3 scenarios where 2 wideouts from the same team were drafted among the first 36 picks, which means, drafted in the first 3 rounds of a standard PPR league. And what is interesting here is that in all 3 scenarios, the secondary guy, the obvious number 2 on paper, right? I mean, there was an alpha wideout, and then there was a very good secondary option. In all 3 scenarios, the secondary guy failed to justify his draft price and went down as a disappointment, all right? And so we're going to discuss each of these 3 one by one and look ahead to 2024. Some very early ADP shows 5 potential scenarios where this could repeat itself, so I wanted to get that out there. If you're new to the channel, though, hit that subscribe button. We are into our off-season analysis. We're going to be doing individual player videos and more lesson learned videos, and then projecting ahead to the draft, the NFL draft, and how things could change. Now, I also wanted to say that I'm going to change it up with the draft guides this year. I used to do this when I covered fantasy baseball. There's going to be 2 fantasy football draft guides this year. All right. There's going to be an early, I guess you could call it early off-season pre-NFL draft version. All right. And then there's going to be a post-NFL draft version, because obviously the draft is going to change things. But I know there is a need and a want to digest fantasy football information during the course of the offseason. When I did fantasy baseball back in the day, the early edition actually sold really, really well. I used to release it right before Christmas, and it would sell like hotcakes. And then, the late off-season edition will come out later on, and people would scoop that up as well as free agency continued to settle in. But I'm going to do that in football as well. So this early off-season football, fantasy football edition will probably come out in the next couple of months, and then the post-draft one will, of course, be in April when the draft is over. But anyway, getting back to the wide receiver situation, let's take each of the 3 scenarios one by one. We'll start with the Philadelphia Eagles. So both A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith were drafted among the top 36 picks, actually almost the top 24. So as far as overall, A.J. Brown was the 15th player overall drafted in PPR leagues last year. That was a mid, sort of like an early second round price tag. And while DeVonta Smith was the 25th player taken overall, which is, right at the start of the 3rd round. So both guys, cost quite a bit. As far as where they were drafted at the wide receiver position, A.J. Brown was drafted wide receiver 8, and DeVonta Smith was drafted as wide receiver 13. So only a separation of 5 between the 2 of them. Now, here's what's interesting. Through week 17, and all these stats that I'm talking about are through week 17, because again, 18, a lot of guys didn't play. I know the Eagles players did. DeVonta Smith was injured actually for week 18. And what I wanted to do is just go through week 17, which I thought would make these stats a little bit more relevant. Now, through week 17 last season, A.J. Brown was wide receiver 4. All right, so he turned out to be a prophet because he was drafted wide receiver 8. He finished week 17 wide receiver 4. DeVonta Smith, however, wide receiver 16. So he lost 3 spots of value because he was drafted wide receiver 13. So A.J. Brown, wide receiver 4 through week 17. DeVonta Smith, wide receiver 16. All right, so that's obviously a separation of 12 between the 2 of them. Whereas they were drafted 5, separated by 5 in the wide receiver rankings. So Brown turned out to be a profit player. DeVonta Smith, who was the secondary guy going into the season on paper, we all knew that, he was a disappointment. Now, in PPR points per game, when both guys were on the field together, all right, when both were together on the field, A.J. Brown last season put up 18.1 PPR points. DeVonta Smith, 14.2. So again, just further, because you could say, oh, through week 17, the guys were hurt, banged up. But when they were both on the field, A.J. Brown produced 4 more points, PPR points, than did Devontae Smith. So that was interesting there. Now, even more stark was the Miami Dolphins situation, all right? So Tyreek Hill was drafted 6th overall, which is in the middle of first round. Jalen Waddle was drafted at number 23. All right. And so that was late second round pick. So both guys from the same team were drafted in the first 2 rounds. Hill, as far as the wide receivers being drafted, he was drafted wide receiver 3. All right. Behind Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. Jalen Waddle was wide receiver 11. All right. So that's only 8 spots separating the 2 of them. Now, as far as the stats, through week 17, Tyreek Hill, wide receiver 2. Jalen Waddle, wide receiver 29. So that is a huge gap between the 2. When you consider they were only drafted 8 apart from each other at the wide receiver position. And then, as far as the numbers, Hill, wide receiver 2 through week 17, Waddle, wide receiver 29. All right. Now, PPR points per game when both were on the field together. 22.2 for Hill, 13.1 for Waddle. That is a huge gap, 9-point gap between the 2 of them. A little bit more than 9-point gap between the 2 of them. And it's interesting too is that it was a very condensed target tree in Miami. Like they didn't use their tight ends much in the passing game. They didn't use a third wide receiver much, and it just goes to show you that Waddle was kind of left behind there by Hill. And now finally the Cincinnati Bengals. So Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Chase was the 3rd player off the board on average early first round pick, while Higgins was the 27th player off the board early 3rd round. All right, so again, both guys drafted into the first 3 rounds. Chase was drafted wide receiver 2 behind Justin Jefferson. T. Higgins was drafted wide receiver 14. Now, this one is stark as well. Through week 17, Jamar Chase wide receiver 10. So he went down as a bust. He lost 8 spots in value. But T. Higgins was wide receiver 48. Wide receiver 48 after being drafted wide receiver 14. The PPR points per game, when both were on the field together, Chase 14.5. Higgins, 10.2. Higgins was a colossal bust. And Chase was a bust too. Did not justify that 3rd overall selection. But Higgins was a monumental bust, and he's going to move on in free agency, whether it's with the Jets, the Bills. That's a rumor there as well. He's going to move on. So that's going to eliminate that situation going forward. So again, 3 scenarios where 2 receivers were drafted in the first 36 picks in PPR leagues, and all 3 of them, the secondary guy disappointed. All right, so that's interesting. Now, very, 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 very early 2024 mock drafts and rankings. There are 5 scenarios, currently 2 where both players are drafted among the first 36, and then there are 3 more where they're in the first 47 picks, really, which extends into the round 4, towards the end of round 4. Now, the 2 that currently are in among the first 36, Brandon Ayuk right now is the 16th player off the board in very early 2024 drafts. All right, so that's, mid-second round guy. And then Deebo Samuel is the 36th player off the board, so he's right there at the end of round 3. Listen, both guys were tremendous last year, but both guys had a hard time putting up points when the other went off. I actually do like the value of Deebo Samuel at 36 because I think Ayuk is being overdrafted early on, and Samuel can be used in the run game as well. So I may not. This is not a situation to me that mirrors the other 3, but again, I actually think Deebo is the better value there. But just to go with the gist of this video, those 2 guys are in the top 36. Now, the Miami Dolphins, again, are in this situation. Tyreek Hill, 5th player off the board overall. Jalen Waddle, the 32nd player off the board overall. So he has slipped now to the 3rd round, the back of the 3rd round. With better value. But again, it's Tyreek Hill's team. So I would be fading Jalen Waddle at that price point. Now, 3 more scenarios that are not into the top 36 but are close or could end up being there. Puka Nacua right now is the 11th player off the board for 2024. Cooper Kupp, 47th player off the board. So Kupp is now at the back of the 4th round. That is way too late. He's going to move up. Cooper Kupp is going to end up being a late third-round pick, in my opinion. So I would fade him everywhere. He's an aging player, has been injured a lot, and this is now Puka Nakua's team, in my opinion. The Philadelphia Eagles, again, A.J. Brown, 8th player off the board. Devontae Smith, the 46th player, right ahead of Cooper Kupp. I love A.J. Brown. Again, for 2024, I'm going to be all in on him, and I'm going to be fading Devontae Smith. And the Houston Texans, this one's interesting to me. So Nico Collins right now is 33rd player off the board at the back of the third round. Tank Dell is the 38th player at the beginning of the fourth round. I like both guys. And in this situation, there's not one that's going in the first or early in the second. So I think with the Texans situation, I would take the cheaper of the two, whether it's Collins or Dell. Dell was going ballistic when Collins was on the field last year. Collins took off at the end, especially when Dell was out. So I would take the cheaper of the two here. This is the only situation where I would take the cheaper guy. 49ers, maybe that's another one. Although I've never been the biggest fan of Deebo Samuel because he gets hurt a lot. Although he was tremendous last year, no doubt about it. But yeah, the Texans situation is one that doesn't exactly fit the other molds of a guy going very early in the first or early in the second round. So I'm willing to go with the cheaper option there. But tell me what you guys think about this. I think this is a really good lesson to take into next season, right? I mean, the trends speak for themselves. All three scenarios last year, the secondary player did not come through with his expected draft costs. Or his ADP. So post in the comments. Let me know what you think. Hit that subscribe button. More videos on the way. More lessons on the way. Stay tuned.